Welcome back to Flight 2 of Pioneers in Passion and Oregon Pinot Noir. With this flight, what I'd like to do is take our thoughts and information from our last flight about flavor and about climate, but I'd like to couple those with geography and soil type. And of course, try and link that all down into the flavors of the wine. It's something that I hope you'll find quite revealing, but also that Willamette Valley producers in particular, but all of Oregon as a whole, will talk to you about if you go and visit their different soil types and how it relates to the wines. So I love instant cartography, so let me draw you a map of Oregon to start the discussion. Okay, I'll actually give you a good chunk of the West Coast here because I love Washington state wines. There you go. All right, so what we've got here is Washington state, and then we have Oregon, and of course California, the massive big brother just down to the south. Now, I've been flexing back and forth between two geographical terms, and I probably should have nailed them both down right at the start. But I've been saying Oregon for one thing, and that's the entire state of Oregon. And then I've also been saying Willamette Valley. And the Willamette Valley is like this in Oregon. It's actually visible from outer space. It's one of the biggest valleys that you'll see in the US. Now, why have I been interchanging them? Well, I thought about it, and I have to say, when I first started with Oregon wines, really almost all Oregon wines were from the Willamette Valley. And so when I started a while back, people just used to say Willamette Valley. Nowadays, I think the story has kind of adjusted a little bit because you get Umpqua Valley down here, and you also get Rogue Valley down here. And I think the Oregon wine industry wants to be inclusive, and so now I hear a lot more frequently Oregon. There's also some winemaking up here, but not much over on that side of the state. So I apologize if I've been using the two terms interchangeably, but hopefully you get the difference or why I've been doing it. Now, we're going to focus almost all of our discussion here on the Willamette Valley. Now, the question I think is, what is the Willamette Valley? What are its major soil types, and how do we get those down into these glasses of wine? Now, we're going to turn the clock back in order to get to the soil types, and we're going to turn the clock back about 12 million years. 12 million years ago, the Willamette Valley and most of this stretch of Oregon was actually all underwater. And with the amount of time that it was under the ocean, with the amount of time that it spent underwater, just mountains of marine sediments fell to the bottom of what would then be the ocean and got compressed. That gives you marine sedimentary soil as one of our major soil types. Now, of course, we all know we don't have that kind of depth of aquatic viticulture going on yet. So what happened to get Willamette Valley up out of the ocean? Well, starting around 15 million years ago, but accelerating about 10 million years ago, the Pacific plate started pushing into the continental plate. This resulted in a couple of major things going on. The first is the formation of two mountain systems, one the frontal range here, and the other the Cascade range here. It also pushed up the valley and exposed it, so it was no longer under the ocean. So now you have marine sedimentary soils up exposed. But what you also have, and you know this even from current times, is the Cascade Mountain Range is extremely volcanic and always has been extremely volcanic. And so in addition to those marine sedimentary soils, you have lots of lava and lots of lava flows. Now, of course, this was mostly in ancient times, or beyond ancient times, millions of years ago. So those lava flows turned into what's known as basalt, or basalt soils. That's actually the two major soil types of the Willamette Valley: marine sedimentary and lava basalt. Now, there are two others to talk about that we can add, but then we're going to come back to those first two, and promise you we'll get to tasting these wines. The two others that we can add are wind-blown loess. Loess is simply just a particulate matter that can be blown by the wind. It accumulates wherever that happens. You could say it's wind-blown loess. With Willamette Valley, most of your wind-blown loess, because of the wind patterns, are on the northeast side of the hills. And the northeast side is not typically where vintners would be planting their vines. So there's very little wind-blown loess that we can discuss and fix to a wine. Interestingly enough, there's lots of wind-blown loess over in Washington and Walla Walla's AVA, which actually stretches into Oregon, but because of grape varieties is associated with Washington, to the point that you can see massive mounds of it. And reasonably, you can call it wind-blown loess because that's home to one of the United States' largest wind farms. Far as the eye can see, wind farms stretching between the two borders. Now, the final soil type that we have in Willamette, and this is going to give us a position of where we're going to plant our vines and where David Lett started planting his vines, is the Missoula flood soils. Now, what happened is about 14,000 years ago, around the town of Missoula, which is off in Idaho, an immense ice dam broke. Now, that may not sound important, but what had happened is almost all of Washington, Idaho, backing up into Canada, had formed this incredibly huge ice dam. And as weather patterns changed, that ice dam broke, and suddenly an enormous amount of water flowed through, carving out the Columbia River Gorge, which is a beautiful, stunning drive for you to take, and then flowing out into the ocean, and some of it cascading down into the Willamette Valley. Now, of course, as a massive flood, it carried a lot of soil with it, and in particular, it was incredibly rich soil. That Missoula flood soil is actually what coats the bottom of the Willamette Valley to this day. Now, it is incredibly rich, and it's a great soil for growing in, but unfortunately, if you plant grapes into that soil, they become so vigorous. And instead of producing grapes, they actually produce enormous amounts of leaves because they're trying to grow all over the place that they can. So it's not a real great place for grape plantings. But it is a great place for other things like walnuts and some of the other amazing agriculture that you'll see in the Willamette Valley. What that means is you want to, if you're a vintner, or if you're thinking about growing grapes and planting a vineyard, you want to get above that soil type. And so most producers don't have hardly any Pinot Noir or any grapes whatsoever on the Missoula flood soil type. So once again, that brings us back to those lava flows, basalt, and also the marine bed, that marine sedimentary. So let's go and let's start tasting this first wine. First wine that we have here is Bergstrom, and it's the Bergstrom Cumberland Reserve. Now, I wanted to pour you this one because we need to, and I think Oregon producers are very proud of this fact, and I think it's a wonderful thing to know about Oregon. We need to start taking the soil type, drinking glasses, and associating it with AVAs. Okay, let's do the drinking first. Now, with basalt soil types, which is this one, what is planted on, many producers say that the wine will have a red fruit character and a kind of brightness to it, maybe some rose, maybe a touch of rose hip, maybe showing off just a little pomegranate to it. On the palate, there'll be some freshness, meaning that it's a lively wine. The acids will probably be fairly taut, and you can feel them, especially in the young wines, but the tannins will be a little bit lower. So very good drinking wines, but with showing their acid character and bright red fruit. Now, this is coming from a specific place called Dundee, the Dundee Hills. And you've got the river coming down here, it makes a bend, and you get the Dundee Hills. Now, Dundee. Now, Willamette Valley producers are extremely proud of the fact that they've been able to take the soil types and the climate and bring it down into the wines and then codify that into law. And the set of laws that they use are what's called the American Viticultural Area. And that's a designation by the US government that hopefully says that the wines coming from this specific geography taste like that specific geography. And furthermore, I think to Oregonians, gives you a sense that the wines are of higher quality because of their tighter geographic designation. So they have, and we're going to work through them all, 5 AVAs that are in the northern Willamette Valley. You could say that they're nested because the Willamette Valley itself is an AVA. Dundee is one of those AVAs. And I like to start with this one because it's where David Lett first planted his vines. And so it's the kind of historical one to go for. Now, a couple of other things to think about here as we talk through soils and climate. One of the things you'll notice is that the vines are higher up, meaning that they're out of those low soils, but they tend to be mid-slope, so they get fairly good drainage. You'll also notice when you go to Oregon that most of the vineyards are situated facing the southeast. And that's a very particular designation, and I think for many years was an incredibly important one for vineyards and also for the resulting wine. The reason was when the Oregon wine industry started, and arguably even to this day, Oregon is a fairly cool climate, one could say a marginal climate to grow grapes. And in one sense, like we talked about, part of that marginal climate means that you hopefully get a very long hang time to develop full phenolic ripeness. But on the other hand, it means that it can often be very cool to the point that the grapes don't ripen. So one of the ways you can manage this balancing act is you can orient the vineyards to the best possible exposition that they're going to get the most morning sun that they can, and also drain off the most water that they can. And that actually, in this hemisphere, is a southeast facing vineyard and on a hillside. Now, did the Oregonians invent this? Did Willamette Valley pioneers invent this? No, they were taking a lesson from Burgundy, where you'll often see that the best vineyards, the ones that are the Premier Cru or Grand Cru, are mid-slope and also face southeast towards the morning sun. Now, we did have in the first flight the Eyrie Vineyards in Dundee, but here I wanted to show you another producer, and this is Bergstrom. Now, I think of Bergstrom, frankly, as a little bit of a superstar. It was founded by a retired surgeon, and I think it was founded as kind of a hobby business, if you will. And it's kind of fun to think about how the industry started as a collective of people coming together and helping each other make their business. And then also you could have people in the 1980s who really just wanted to have a good time and experienced a good wine life, and it didn't take $1 zillion to accomplish that. And you had a community that would welcome you in and sponsor you and give you thoughts and ideas of how to make everything work. A real collective, fun community. And I think you can feel it to this day if you visit. But here, this is now in the second generation, and Josh Bergstrom is the winemaker and owner. He happened to marry a French woman, and I'm assured and have seen her that she is also the fully owner and winemaker of the winery as well. Josh, I think, has been continuing the pioneering spirit of Oregon wines with his kind of constantly working to make his wines better. And talking to him, he's a powerful man to discuss his wines. I think maybe to the most dramatic, beyond his winemaking technique, which I think he's extremely skilled at, is he adopted biodynamics fairly early. Now, we do tastings that's entirely on biodynamics, but I'll summarize them here by saying that they're one step beyond organic because they try and look at the whole system and how it all fits together. For Josh, I've heard him speak, and it's a passionate way for him to think scientifically about his soils, the soil contents, how healthy the soil is, the entire biological system around the soil, including the diversity of plants within a vineyard, but also the diversity of animals and insects within a vineyard, all of that compounding into his wines. He told me once that he loved a particular vintage because he harvested early enough that he thought the wines were just perfect, but he felt like Mother Nature was going to give him about one more month after harvest to go in and start working on all of the biodiversity in the vineyards. I think just an amazing man and amazing vintner, showing you the passion that continues in Willamette Valley in Oregon. Here again, his Pinot Noir. They make all kinds of single vineyards, but I wanted to show you this one because I think it's just gorgeous drinking right now. Okay, if that's kind of our classic soil association with Willamette Valley because of the Dundee Hills, I want to take you to another AVA that actually looks a bit like a horseshoe. And of course, if you can't see this map, then there are many online, and you can also buy some books that have them too, but I love drawing them out by hand. Here, this next area that we're going to go to is the McMinnville-Yountville district, and it, again, wraps around as a horseshoe like that. Now, our interesting change is this is all sedimentary soil. So it's all based on that rising of the ocean depth and almost entirely sedimentary. Now, when I started in the industry, the most well-known vineyard within that was the Shea Vineyard. And it was considered absolutely just an honor if you were able to, as a vintner, go and purchase some of the Shea Vineyard's grapes. I think this gives an interesting point in the history of Oregon's wine production, which is that, to my understanding, many of those early pioneers who came to Oregon didn't necessarily have the money to invest in vineyards. So they started by asking farmers to help them out and convert some of their farmland into grapes with them buying it. I think that tradition continues to this day of you have many, many farmers who don't make wine, and then you have many vintners who don't farm grapes. Now, certainly the two talk to each other all the time. It's not like it's an aggressive relationship, but it's an interesting one, and one that I think has developed over the years. And it gives us such things as you can go into you can go into Portland and you can visit many wineries in the city of Portland that may frankly have 6 or 7 different vintners using the equipment collectively and buying from different fruit sources. Again, here for us to get this down into the glass, when I first started, the Shea Vineyards was just considered the top of the charts. Now, they used to sell almost all of their fruit, and they still sell quite a lot of their fruit, but they started over a decade now, over a couple of decades ago now, making their own wines out of their own vineyard. So this is the producer Shea making their Shea Vineyard. Shea Vineyard sits tucked up right here, and again, all those sedimentary soils. Now, to me, what that gives is a real black cherry fruit character to this wine, and I think it just is, got some gorgeous fruit and cola spice to the nose. On the palate, I think it's a little bit bigger, broader, more powerful wine. I don't think we're not drinking California Cabernet here, but I think it's a noticeable change from what you have in the Bergstrom. Richer, heavier, fuller. Now, if you're tasting these wines and you're thinking, wow, your descriptions really are not matching what I'm sensing in the glass, I do actually have an explanation for you. First, I would say it's all up to you. I like just saying all of these things to give a tool to sorting out what these wines are like. That's a little bit of a dodgy answer. The other answer is that Oregon, and I think most producers would agree with this, Willamette Valley in particular has been warming. And especially over the last couple of vintages that were released, they've had a series of successively hotter, warmer vintages. And if you look through your tasting charts or as you're tasting and buying these wines, 17, 16, 15, and 14 were all record-breakingly warm vintages in Willamette Valley. 13 was the catastrophic one of rain. 18 is a return to what we might call classic, meaning that it's cool Pacific Northwest weather. But you have this set of vintages that were very warm. Now, what does that mean? It means that if you think about the little flavor spectrum that David Adelsheim told us about or talked to me about it regarding the first flight, the wines are going to get darker and denser fruit character. They're also going to be a little bit higher in alcohol as well. So when you take a look at Oregon's vintages, and it's, I think, one of the fun things about wine is that Mother Nature is always going to be different, and you can feel that in the wine. The other thing I would say to wrap that up is that Oregon producers will also stress that Oregon, Willamette Valley, has vintages. They, of course, say it in the difference of, well, does California really have any vintages, or is it just all the same? So they take pride in the fact that the wines show what Mother Nature has given them over the past year. All right, with that, let's move on, encounter our friend David Adelsheim again, but also introduce a new pioneering spirit into Oregon, and one that was a historical moment in Oregon and continues to be, I think, a source of pride. And that's going to take us to Chardonnay and to this wine, which is Domaine Drouhin's Arthur Chardonnay. Let's go back to that discussion of Gris, where I ended it by saying, why not Chardonnay? Well, here's the non-economic answer, which I think makes really good sense, in addition to the economic answer making sense. Why not Chardonnay begins because when producers start making Pinot, they also then start bringing Chardonnay up to Willamette Valley and planting it in the hopes of doing the Burgundian match. The unfortunate thing is the clones that they have, the vine material that they have, is almost entirely US based, coming from UC Davis in California. And what that means is that those vines had been propagated or had genetically modified themselves in California to fit the California environment. Specifically, what went on, and one of the pioneers with the issue was David Adelsheim, was that when you planted Chardonnay, when you were planting it in Oregon, in Willamette Valley in the late 60s, 70s, and 80s, you were having to use California clones, and those California clones were developed for really hotter areas, meaning that the berries themselves were much, much bigger, with the idea that they were going to photosynthesize a lot, develop a lot of sugars, and be very big and have enough heat and sunlight, California sun and heat, to ripen fully. Well, when you stick them in the ground in Willamette Valley in the 70s, unfortunately, they never, or we can say they always struggled to ripen. Most vintners that I talked to who lived through those hard times with Chardonnay said that it was so frustrating because maybe every fourth year, the Chardonnay would get ripe enough and produce something really interesting and outstanding, and then you'd have 3 years of defeat. It was almost like it was leading you on because there's always that one time that would happen, and then 3 more years of terrible failure. Well, David Adelsheim worked on that problem and kept on working it over the years, and it's an interesting story for him to hear. But someone came into the picture as well, and that's the Drouhin family from Burgundy. Now, they are fascinating. I should probably nail them down. I'm not sure how they first got their interest in Oregon Pinot. I'm not sure if one of them tasted an Irie vineyard from the time or some sort of competition. But I do know by the early 1980s, the family of the Drouhins, it's 4 kids and 1 father, start to visit Oregon. And they start to visit Oregon, and they make the amazing decision at the time that Oregon has a chance at making spectacular, world-class Pinot Noir. And they are the first Europeans to decide to invest in Oregon in a very big way. Now, at the time, I think probably their European, especially Burgundy brethren, thought it was absurd that they would travel to the US to try and make Burgundy. But I also think at the time for Willamette Valley producers, it was a huge validation of the struggle and of the pioneering spirit that they had been progressing on, that a long-term, large European Burgundian winery decided to invest in the project that they were doing. That investment first occurred in 1982, which would have been extremely early years for making Pinot Noir in Oregon. Still in the early years, I should say. Now, we of course are not having Pinot Noir, we're having Chardonnay. One of the things that happens with with Domaine Drouhin coming to Oregon is that Joseph Drouhin takes a look at the clonal material that's going on, and he points out what to him is utterly obvious, that you're never going to make good Chardonnay in Oregon with those clones. They simply do not match the environment and the soil. He points out that in Burgundy, his Chardonnay grapes will be tiny, whereas Oregon's grapes at the time were huge. And his tinier Burgundian grapes could ripen in a cooler climate and give you full phenolic flavors. It was simply a matter of genetics on the part of the grape, using the wrong clones to fit the environment. Now with that, he and also David Adelsheim and many other producers struggled to try and get Burgundian clones into Oregon of Chardonnay. Now, David related the story, and he tried to do it legally through the US government. And one of the things that the government has for grape material, for better or worse, is, probably for better at this day and age, is that they will take any cuttings, any vine clonal material coming in from outside the US, and they will quarantine it, and they will plant it in the ground to figure out if it's bringing viruses in a quarantined area. That quarantining actually takes, I think the first run David did with the US government was 7 or 10 years long. A very long time to see if it has viruses. And unfortunately, I think of the first 100 vines David brought over, he got something like 3 or 4 back from the US government. And those 3 or 4 didn't work out. And so he actually tried it again and had the same process, but this time he got many more through. Now at this point though, our story of Oregon Chardonnay, Willamette Valley Chardonnay that might have began in the late 70s is 2 decades on. And by this time, Pinot Gris has found commercial success. So by the late 90s, and I think then into the 2000s, there was this thought of, well, we now have the chance to make Oregon Chardonnay, but we've also got a solid horse running in Oregon Pinot Gris. So I think from the 2000s, maybe up until this day, most wineries produce Gris. But over the last 5 years, I've seen many Oregon wineries start to specialize in Chardonnay, and I think it's really dramatic Chardonnay as a whole. So here, I wanted to bring you the one that I think sort of was the catalyst for the Chardonnay event, and Taste Oregon Chardonnay. This one to me tastes a bit more Burgundian, being just a touch savory with some cream characteristic to it, and then really smooth and suave on the body. I think fun though to reflect back that of all the struggles that Oregon Chardonnay has had, here we find it succeeding, and succeeding brilliantly with the upcoming